One last time for the 2021 season, let's talk about the Oakland A's. Welcome to the live stream, everybody, by the way. And hopefully you've noticed my shirt. HENDULAN. How awesome that 30 years later we have a shirt. I don't know that there were shirts back in the late 80s, early 90s for Dave Henderson, center fielder of the Oakland A's, and HENDULAN out there at the Coliseum. LastDiveBar.com is where you pick these up. They do great things. They make great products, and they give back in a great way for outstanding purposes and causes surrounding the Oakland A's. So they're not just in it for the company part, they're in it to give back. I absolutely love that. Okay. All that being said, welcome to the stream. And what I wanted to do here was give you a full recap of the season. I wanted to do this here now 3 days removed from Sunday as the season concluded, 162 games. While this was still fresh, I feel like that's important. If I did a review video, weeks from now, that it wouldn't all be as fresh, it wouldn't all be as relevant. I wanted to give it some time to sink in, but I also wanted it so that everything made a lot of sense and I could really bring the most important topics to the table here. Just a couple days removed from game 162, and obviously last night was a wild card game the A's would have wanted to be in, and pretty soon the ALDS, which they really would have wanted to be in, will get underway. So let's begin with the 2021 Oakland A's season recap. And there's so many things to talk about, and we'll do that, but I want to begin with the headlines. They obviously got away from their 97 win pace, and they got away from the division title that they captured last season. Now, 60 games in 2020, a bunch of other crazy things going on. Like, that still was an important season to me. That team was very good. They came together. There's no question about that. Same thing with 18 and 19, when they actually did win 97 games. 2020 was the equivalent of 97 games. But here, in 21, about 10 games shy of that. I mean, it's definitely a big difference. So to understand that this team didn't have anywhere near the success of the prior seasons is important. I thought the quote from Bob Melvin 2 days ago was spot on. He thought that during his 11 years in Oakland, that this was the first time that he had a team he thought would go to the playoffs, didn't get to the playoffs. And a couple reasons why, one of them being the streaky nature of this group. I mean, yeah, they were riding the wave, but maybe riding it a little bit too hard sometimes. There were some great highs. There were also some very unfortunate lows, and it really did feel like they couldn't maintain the top of the wave and ride it for a bit before falling off and then coming right back up. So the streaky nature of wins and losses, and I have an example of that, which is going to blow your mind in just a couple minutes. And last but certainly not least, it has nothing to do with the actual baseball on the field this year. But if you're an A's fan, you obviously know of the stadium situation that is developing, clearly at Howard Terminal, as it has been for a couple years, and now the city and county are involved, and there may be some new progress and good things happening on new fronts. I'll talk about that later on, especially with the county of Alameda. But also during this past season, the option and the conversation of Las Vegas also emerged. So all of that, a headline, I mean, no matter how you see it, if you're optimistic or pessimistic or somewhere in between, the stadium situation truly became a thing this year. It had been talked about for many years, but I mean, not to this level of detail and extent. I mean, this was really the baseball season where that came to the forefront. So let's talk about things that cost the A's in 2021. Beginning with Trevor Rosenthal, who they acquired last offseason, was supposed to be their closer. It was right out of spring training. He had one injury, and then about halfway through the year, just when he was starting to return to the Coliseum, we started to see him around June and into July. Then we find out there's a separate injury, another surgery, another recovery. He would absolutely not even pitch once for the A's this year. Frustrating enough to take the first injury because it was going to keep him out about 85 to 90% of the season, but there was some hope that at the end you would get a piece that you were banking on the entire time. I want to say that this was costly, and people will point to the contract and the salary, and that's what fans do. But I also want to say how this impacted the team most, not just not having the closer that you expected and a closer with, experience, but it also affected the A's bullpen when you think about the backwards first mentality, because you can really slot out your bullpen once you have the closer. Then you know who your setup guys are. Then you know who your middle relief guys are. And then you know who your, let's say, fifth inning guy, Yusmeiro Petit, usually is. But it's so hard to do when you don't have this one domino piece. Not to make excuses, and as we go through the costly elements of this season, this was a big one that not a lot of people were talking about on an everyday basis because they never saw him, so it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. Also costly that Mike Fiers, who was critical for the team in prior seasons, only pitched twice this year. He was also dealing with arm injuries. And I think it's just a matter of what would it have been like if he were in there. Now, you wouldn't have seen maybe two of the better stories of the season in James Caprillion and Cole Irvin, how they stepped up and did their thing. And the rotation overall had a pretty solid effort. I mean, you had a pitcher of the month of June in Sean Manaea. You had a pitcher of the month in September in Frankie Montas, not to mention what Chris Bassitt did nearly all season long until the injury. So you had a solid starting staff, but what if you had a Mike Fiers? And then maybe you could take one of those starting pieces, use it in the bullpen. You see what I'm saying here? It's a trickle-down effect of injuries. And again, not excuses. This is just absolute reality. Let's get away from the injuries and get to something more rare, an 80-game suspension for Ramon Laureano that was handed down in early August. Now, what's costly about this, it was going to keep him out the rest of this season. It was going to keep him out for any A's postseason games, and it's also going to keep him out for the first, I haven't done the math, sorry about that. It's also going to keep him out for the first bit of next season. He was having a tremendous start to the year. Then he got hurt. Then he came back and he struggled. And I don't know in retrospect how much the injury was part of that, but clearly eventually it all went really wrong when he was suspended for PED usage. So frustrating for the team. Again, I think this is one that down the stretch, not forgotten. Nobody forgets about Laser Ramon. There's no question about that. But this happened in early August. By mid-September, when the team really started to struggle and they had acquired some other players, this was kind of not a front burner story. But in the end, when you look at the course of a season, it was the first injury and then the suspension that really cost the A's as it relates to Ramon. Also costly, but in a different way, because we did see Stephen Piscotty and we did see a lot of Chad Pinder at the very end of this season, but the way that these guys battled through injuries. Now, for Piscotty, it was the wrist. For Pinder, it was the knee, I believe in lower back. There were multiple injuries for Chad. These are guys that the team counted on to produce on a regular basis in prior seasons. And even when they were there, I want to make this very clear, even when they were playing, it wasn't with 100% health. And because of that, you're not getting the player that you normally do or the one you're normally expecting. So the fact that even these guys had ailments all year that they fought through, in a certain way, cost the team. And how could you not look at Chris Bassitt's injury on August 17th in Chicago as a huge setback? Now, at the time, in the moment, look at Sean Murphy's face right there. And you could see Matt Olson running over too. Everybody didn't know what to do. We did not know that night what would be the certain health of Chris Bassitt. And that's all we cared about. And then what happens is when you find out he's okay and the brain and the eyes were going to be fine, there wasn't any lingering concussion effects that we knew about. When you find out things are going to be okay, then you start to get selfish. When can he come back? What does this mean to the team? But I want to be very clear. When this happened, we couldn't have cared less about anything else beyond Chris Bassitt's immediate health. But a lot of people will look back and say that this was the turning point, not just a turning point. This was the turning point of the season where the A's could never get it back. And maybe because they lost 3 of 4 against the White Sox in this series, and that night's game was just a throwaway. This happened, I think, in the second inning. The rest of the game was a throwaway after that. That injury was costly, but hey, What are you going to do about it? Also costly was the A's bullpen in the months of August and September. You know, it's not a compliment, but it was just the truth. A lot of times it felt like no lead was safe for this team. And unfortunately for them, I mean, fortunately and unfortunately, they would get early leads. They'd be up 5-2. They'd be up 4-1. They'd be up even 1 or 2-0, which sometimes it has to be enough to win you a game. Not all the time, but sometimes. But in 2021, the A's bullpen converted 39 of 67 save opportunities. That's 58%. They had 28 blown saves, tied for the second most in Major League Baseball. No, alone at second most in Major League Baseball. And their 27 one-run losses. Now, it's not entirely on the bullpen, but it just goes to show you 27 one-run losses this season led the American League. They played a lot of close games, which is frustrating because they lost a lot of close games. If that were reversed and they had among the most one-run wins in the AL, like I think the Mariners did, we're talking about a totally different story here. Also costly, Oakland's record against the West. I mentioned the A's record against Seattle and how that went, 4-15, which is the exact inverse of what the A's did to Anaheim. Now you're 15-4 against the Angels. Did I say Anaheim or Los Angeles? Whatever. I even put A&A in there, not LAA. I'm old school. Actually, if I was really old school, I would have said California Angels. But basically, Seattle and Anaheim, you dominated and got dominated. It washes out to be a 500 record. And then you only went 10-9 against Texas. I say that respectfully. They're a big league ball club, but where did they finish the season record-wise? Having them win 9 of 19 games against you just can't happen. And the A's eventually, you know, with a late sweep in the season, they finished 8-11 against the Astros. Their record against the division overall was costly. Like, you'd love to play just 500 against the Astros. And even if the Mariners, let me point this out. If the Mariners were good like they are, or like they finished being, what if you went 500 against the Astros and the Mariners? Or what if you just went 500 against the Mariners alone? A's would be in the playoffs. So that's kind of a regret and a thing to look back on. Not to mention, what did Seattle end up winning their last dozen games head-to-head against Oakland? That's how it went down. Okay, so what went well for the A's in 2021? And I know this sounds weird to say because everybody went through it. Every team essentially completed it. Nobody missed games. I mean, there were setbacks for individuals and there were postponed games and this and that. But how about the fact that in spring training of 21, if I looked back and told myself, hey, the A's are not going to miss a game this year. And they only had one, I believe, early on against the Tigers, which had to be postponed until the next day. They played a doubleheader, I think. They only had one game change all season long. You know, based on where we were back in February, March, and April, health-wise in this country, no vaccines yet necessarily for everybody, and the pandemic was still very much raging, and fans were slowly trickling back into stadiums. I say this respectfully now because I hope you remember this at some point. It was a positive that the season was completed for the A's and every other team across baseball. I don't want to minimize that point. How about Matt Olson's bat? No question this season went well, and not to take away from his glove. I truly believe he's going to get that third Gold Glove this offseason. Maybe not his best year defensively. Like, there have been even better, but he is still among the absolute best at what he does over there. But we're talking about the bat. And he flirted with 40, literally got 39 in game 161. I hoped he was going to, was it 160? 160. I hoped he was going to do it in that final weekend, just get to 40, because he had already had the new career high in homers. He already surpassed 100 RBI for the season. He upped his batting average this year by 80 points. And he cut his strikeout rate literally in half. And by the way, can I just say that over the course of this video, you know what, let me go to the truth camera. It's important to say that I'm not going to overwhelm you with stats. I don't have my notes. I'm pulling all this from the brain right now. There's nothing up on the screen, but I have to tell you that I don't want to make this season review and what went well all about numbers, and I don't want to be, reading from a textbook. I just want to give you the gut instinct impressions from this season. Anyway, Matt Olson's bat clearly took a step forward from 2020. If he can crank out more seasons like what he just did, I think he's going to be really happy with his MLB career. And he's doing, I think the best way to put it, he did in 2021 what everybody knows he's capable of. One of the only guys that didn't change places in the lineup, one of the only regulars this year that didn't change spots in the lineup, was pretty much always the 3-hitter. I think sometimes cleanup, but always the 3-hitter. So let's move on. The trade deadline, that went really well for the Oakland A's. And I think Billy Beane and David Force said the other day, they made the same reference that we had been making for a while. Their best deadline before this was probably Jermaine Dye in the early 2000s. I mean, literally their best deadline in 20 years. Starling Marte, Josh Harrison, Andrew Chafin, Yan Gomes. Those 4 were not the biggest pieces at the deadline. They were not the big names. You remember where they're like 10? Was it 10 or 12? There was double-digit all-stars that got traded at this year's deadline. I mean, it was a pretty pivotal deadline for all of baseball. And yeah, so the A's don't end up, with the Chris Bryants necessarily. But they got some puzzle pieces that absolutely fit their team perfectly. And we don't talk about this a lot because it's not on-field performance, but the front office performance at the deadline truly deserves to be remembered. And I used the reference of like Marte as a great vacation home. You saw the pictures online. You kind of knew, like all of us, I mean, especially me covering the American League all these years and the Oakland A's, I watch baseball. I know who Starling Marte is, but Billy and David also said this the other day. Same thing. They knew who he was, but nobody truly appreciated him until they watched him up close and personal every day with the Oakland A's. Marte stealing bags, getting on base, disrupting pitchers when he was on second. And Harrison, too. I'm sorry to make this all about number 2, but Harrison and Yan Gomes working with the pitching staff. Andrew Chafin, the lefty out of the pen to add solidity. Or is it solidarity? Why would I use a word I'm not sure of? Anyway, those 4 guys, truly unbelievable. But the Marte reference, staying at a vacation house that you saw the pictures, you pretty much knew what you were going to get. You ended up loving the place. And then at a certain point, vacation ends. And nobody gets to live in a vacation house forever. So I do think there is some optimism around potentially keeping Harrison. He was only on a $1 million deal, 1 year, $1 million contract for this past season. That's ridiculous. That's among the best bargains in baseball. I certainly hope the A's can make a competitive offer to keeping him around. And others too, but in terms of affordability, let's throw that out there. Cole Irvin's season, I thought, went really well. Maybe started better than it finished and had more ups and downs, more downs than ups than he wanted. But for Cole Irvin to earn a spot in this rotation right out of spring training when they knew Fires wasn't going to be available, he had a couple really good last starts in spring, if I remember correctly, earned that spot. Had a couple of signature performances early on. Was it the game against the Blue Jays? 8 innings. Shut him out through 8, I want to say. Gave up 2 or 3 hits. Adding a lefty to your rotation. Adding a pitcher. Not a thrower, but adding a pitcher to your rotation. Somebody who should be around next year, is under team control. I thought that was a really good story of the season. And the similar thing can be said. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I did put these 2 back to back. When James Caprillion joined the team, I believe this was after the Luzardo injury, or somewhere around May is when Caprillion joined the team, but had a couple wins out of the gate, and a guy who had been injured for several seasons. I mean, Cap came over in the Sonny Gray trade, right, to the Yankees. Like, Sonny Gray is long gone from the Yankees, and Caprillion had been in the organization for a while, was still hurt, was dealing with multiple different things. For him to have this debut, for him to latch and last all season long, and I think the same can be said about Irvin, that's what made this season for them so special. The fact that they were reliable, they were every turn contributors to the rotation. If I could say something about both these guys, but specifically Caprillion, it's a catch-22. One of the things I admired most about his work was how he battled through traffic, how he battled through jams that unfortunately he got himself into. But he got himself out of so many of these. The point being that next year, when he wants to take next steps, and this isn't a secret to anybody, if he could limit the amount of damage and trouble and hard innings that he has to pitch, that should extend him over the course of a season a lot better. He ended this year by throwing out of the bullpen. I think the team looked at him and knew that the 170-something innings he threw was a lot for him. It's more than he'd ever thrown in his life. But I don't want to diminish how good of a season he had by that. I want the focus to be Irvin and Caprillion as two things that went really well that, as for spring training, I'm not sure everybody saw coming. This also went pretty well too. Jed Lowrie of the New York Metropolitans for the prior 2 seasons. What did he play in, like 8 games? He had something like 9 at-bats between 2019 and 2020. And comes back here, hitting doubles like he didn't miss a beat, switch hitting, playing a lot of second base in the first half of the year. It's unfortunate down the stretch that the injuries caught up with him. For a while, he was only DHing. And then for a while after that, he couldn't even be in the lineup. But the fountain of youth aspect for him, and what was this, his 3rd tour of duty with the Oakland A's? Just a pretty magical story that a guy who was on the shelf that long and on the shelf that hard for 2 years comes to the Oakland A's and looks like the 2015 version of himself. Good teammate, professional. It was a treat to honestly think that you were going to get Jed Lowrie as insurance. The A's didn't have their infield situation all sorted away. Had a prior track record with him. They took a chance on Jed. Jed absolutely delivered. For a while there in the middle of summer, this guy was barreling up baseballs like nobody's business. This is a pure hitter right here to the highest degree. Also, this went well too. And I know a lot of people will look back and their first impression of Elvis Andrus was not the best with the Oakland A's. First couple weeks and months, but really probably 5-6 weeks of the season, they were rough on him, batting well below 200. Defensively was fine, but quickly went down in the lineup to the point where he was all of a sudden hitting 9th. What's crazy about that, though, is when he turned things around, Bob Melvin kept him there, and it rewarded the team quite well. He was actually one of their most consistent hitters in the second half of the season. And I'm not talking about power like the A's typically, display, but his ability to get hits, find gaps, get balls through the infield. I thought he was very sure-handed at shortstop. The injury that he suffered in the final home series of the season, so frustrating. Rounding third base, broke his left fibula, also had some issues with a high ankle sprain, has already underwent surgery. They're saying that he should be on target for 2022, and that's the other thing. A lot of people think that, and I was victim of this too, I was guilty of this too, is, he was traded from the Rangers and people thought, well, that's a contract year for him. No, he's under contract next season with the Oakland A's too. So having your shortstop at least settled for one more year, and I can hear people saying this already, comparing and contrasting him to Marcus Semien. And obviously we know what Marcus did with the Blue Jays this year, had a career best season, had a phenomenal season. I'm not here to make the Marcus and Elvis comparison. I'm really not. I do not want to judge Elvis directly against a different individual. I want to judge him based on what he was up against, what the A's were up against if they didn't get him, and how he performed over the course of a season. He did not let the bad start weigh him down the rest of the way. Good leader. Teammates seem to absolutely love him. I gauge a lot of things on what Bob Melvin says about players, and they were glowing at the end of the year. And we saw the last week of baseball without him. And quite honestly, it did not look the same. I could not have imagined this past A's season without the shortstop Elvis Andrus. That is definitely something that started rough, but overall big picture went well for the team this year. Tony Kemp also went well in a variety of ways. Now, he had career highs in so many different offensive categories, but to me, at-bats and games played tell the true story. Batted a bunch of different places in the lineup, was a defender in a bunch of different positions, hit 345, I want to say, in the final 45 games of the year, something like that. See, again, I'm not relying on all the stats here and pulling it off my head. But clearly, and we all saw what he did in the final weekend against Houston. Not that it mattered to the team in standings, but the point is that he got in the second half red hot. And another player who's under contract with the team, so versatile. You need guys like this. You need the plays he made defensively with a lot of flair. You need the chemistry, the glue guy inside a clubhouse. That is Tony Kemp. He's going to give you a lot of effort every single time. What did he have? A strikeout, a non-strikeout streak this year? Was it 90 at-bats? It was like 90 at-bats between strikeouts. So that to me is fantastic. I mean, even his outs were productive, putting the ball in play, making the opposition defense work. Tony Kemp had a career season based on opportunities. The A's giving him these chances and him earning these chances lets you know that he was having his best big league season. And if you look at how the A's acquired him from Chicago and how Chicago got him from Houston, what an absolute deal for the green and gold. Okay, the gut punches of this season. This is a longer list than I think any other Oakland A's team I could come up with. And I mean, there should not be 15 gut punches, but I have them here for you now in retrospect. And you'll notice that gut punch number 1, it doesn't even take place until mid to late June. So all 15 of these gut punches happened down the stretch, close to the second half. I mean, it really was a great beginning. Well, not great out of the gate, but overall a great April, May, and into June. But June 18th, I think this was one of the first turning points of the season. 18th through the 20th against the Yankees in New York. You win the first game on a Friday night. You drop the next two in dramatic fashion, a late homer by the Yankees on Saturday. And then the A's were trying to win the game after giving up a late lead on Sunday. And Sean Murphy hits into a triple play off Aroldis Chapman, who couldn't find the plate. If I'm correct, he walked the bases loaded. There was one out. No outs, right? Triple play. And that's how the game ends. And frustrating because the A's could and should have swept the series. Instead, they lose 2 out of 3. But that's okay, right? That's the Yankees. You're gonna hit these moments of bad luck. Their next series against the Rangers, a 4-game series in Arlington, they split. I mean, that's no good way to follow up after playing the Yankees really well. And that's what's next on your road trip. Nothing quite bad until after the All-Star break, July 22nd through the 25th, against Seattle. Again, a series that started out well. The A's took game 1. But then the next 3 games are each decided by single runs, and they go to the Mariners. 3 straight 1-run losses for the A's against Seattle. Now, we know how that ultimately turned out, how Seattle decided Oakland's season in an unfortunate manner, but that was kind of the start of these close games and this one-sided nature and stuff really not going the A's way. Then more gut punches. Trevor Rosenthal, we find, is out for the season shortly after that Seattle series. Stephen Piscotty's wrist really starts to keep him out of games, out of lineups. He's going to eventually have surgery. He'll be out for the season. Same thing with Rosenthal, his second major surgery, out for the year. And then at the beginning of August, right near the trade deadline, in fact, right after it, Ramon Laureano is suspended for the rest of this season and into the 2022 schedule. That was a huge gut punch. I mean, look at the names and contributions that you would like to project for these names and players, and now you're getting none of that down the stretch. Gut punches continue. August 17th, Chris Bassett hit with a line drive comebacker in the head. What are the chances? And not just that. That game was toast. That night was an absolute throwaway. But then the A's in that series lose 3 of 4 to Chicago. Frustrating. What a gut punch. I mean, the injury alone losing Bassett for, at the time, what we were pretty sure would be the rest of the season. It wasn't, but did not help the A's trajectory at that point. Then you get to late August, back at home, hosting the Giants. A's win Game 1 of the series. Same thing. Games 2 and 3 are decided by Giants pinch hitters in late innings. Seventh and an eighth inning homer was one Lamont Wade Jr., and the other one was Donovan Solano. Back-to-back days, the A's bullpen gives up a seventh and an eighth inning homer, pinch hit homers that take leads and ultimately win the Giants 2 games and the series. What a gut punch that is. Okay, let's go to August 23rd and 24th. 2 games at the Coliseum, quick series against Seattle, just even split at the worst. The A's lose both. And at that point, Seattle was, I want to say, 3 or 4 games back of the A's. That would have pushed them really out the door. That would have fended them off for a lot longer than what happened. Instead, now they're only 2 games behind the A's. I mean, they are knocking on Oakland's door for the first time really all season. That was as close as they'd ever been. And then it brings us to that infamous weekend series in Toronto. And by the way, personal pet peeve. It's not a famous series because that's for a good way. Infamous is famous for a bad reason. So many people use infamous and they think they're saying famous. This, if you want to know the definition, if you always want to remember what's infamous, that weekend series at Rogers Center was infamous. You had the implosion on Friday night. The A's were up 8-2. Marcus Semien ends up walking off. Was it a 3-run homer to win the Jays the game? They got blown out, I think, on Saturday. And then they won then the A's, can't remember what was the sequence. And this is why I'm trying to do this review as close as possible. Let's just say that all 3 losses were heartbreaking because of how they happened and how this series started. But the A's did get blown out in one of those other 2 games. They got swept in 3. A huge gut punch of the season. The way it happened, the word implosion, that's another word that's perfect to the definition there. Then you get to September 10th through the 12th. Again, these Texas Rangers. Are you noticing a trend? The Rangers in Seattle keep offering gut punches here. Win the first game of the series at the Coliseum, lose the next 2. September 20th through the 23rd, still at home against Seattle, swept in 4 games by the Mariners. Not just that. Remember before how we said that the A's couldn't kind of put their season to rest, couldn't really knock them out of the race? Well, when the A's got swept, they also got leapfrogged by the 23rd in the standings. And the A's never caught up again with Seattle. Okay, we're almost getting to the end of the gut punches here. Elvis Andrus, final home series of the season, breaks his fibula, scoring the game-winning run, rounding third. He actually ran the final 90 feet with a broken fib. I'm sure the adrenaline alone pushed him through those 90 feet, but look, at that point, you were hanging on by a thread. Your season was. That was kind of the ultimate kick in the shorts. How about the 12 losses in a row to Seattle? That happened on the final road trip. A's got swept up at T-Mobile Park, and that's when they were really sniffing the playoff opportunity. Still hard to believe that this year they didn't make it. They haven't made the playoffs since 2001. And then I'm throwing this in there because it's a nice round number, 162, but also 15 for me to fill out these gut punches. Getting walked off on, even in the last game of the year, that didn't mean a single thing. And Chris Davis hits the homer in the top of the 9th to tie it at 6. And then the Astros literally win in the bottom of the 9th in a walk-off. It was a microcosm of an A's season that had a lot of highs and lows, don't get me wrong. I mean, had some good highs too. It had some tremendous lows, as you can see here with all of these gut punches. All right. The streaky nature of the Oakland A's. Now, these are just a couple examples here. They lost their first 7 of 8 games at the beginning of the season. Houston, the Dodgers, and then Houston just trounced them. And I don't mean, losing by 1. The A's were losing by 6, 7, and 8 on a regular basis. They were giving up double digits to the Astros and Dodgers a lot in that first week and a half. We tried to figure out who they were. But literally the next day, from April 8th to April 9th, they get their first win, then they lose one, and then starting in Houston, April 9th, they go on a 13-game win streak, which I believe was tied for the longest in all of Major League Baseball through the course of this season. No team won 14 this year, but the A's won 13 in a row. They also had 2 7-game win streaks from June 18th, 11th through the 18th, and August 4th through the 12th. Right after the trade deadline, again, that's when we thought there was a turn for the good. But there's also this about the streaky nature. This one, to me, is just a blowaway. I mean, look at talk about consecutive streaks here from September 3rd to the 29th. This is a 25-game stretch, which only excludes, I think, the final 3 games of the season. They lost 4, won 3, lost 3, won 5, lost 4, won 3, lost 3. Hang on to your surfboards when you ride that wave. I mean, you do like to see a 3-game, a 5-game, and a 3-game win streak. You like to see those, no doubt. But the losses in between can only be 1 or 2. You can't have a 3 or 4-game losing streak or multiple ones of those in between there. And honestly, this is one of the biggest differences and the huge talking points of this A's season. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. What comes next for this group? And I've put up the list of free agents for 2022. Diekman and Chafin have respective options in their contract. I want to say Diekman's is a club option. Chafin might be a mutual option. But who do the A's keep? Who can they keep? Who are they interested in? I mean, Mark Canha's name pops out to me as somebody for a lot of different reasons that you'd want to keep. What he means to the team, the versatility he offers you. Was a leadoff guy this year. He's probably stepped out of his comfort zone to take on that role. He did quite well with it in the first half. We talked about him as a potential all-star this year. I thought he was in that conversation at the least. Struggled with it maybe in the second half. He also had a hip injury that wasn't talked about very much. But in terms of who to keep and where to start, I mean, that's definitely on the list. I talked about Josh Harrison a little bit earlier and the $1 million 1-year deal that he was on. If the A's could, give him the raise that he deserves or the years that he would want, be very enticed by that. And I'm not going to get into everybody's name here because if I omit somebody, then it's going to look like I'm purposely doing that. But I do want to point out Canha and Harrison specifically. With some other players, I would love, others here I would love to have back. Others I wonder what is next. But the overall theme of this for the A's is what kind of offseason is this? Are we talking major overhaul here? Or are we talking retooling and complementing the existing group? We're going to find that out pretty quick. There's also some other auxiliary factors, which I think are going to play into this offseason. The whole labor issue that could develop as the CBA expires between the players and the league December 1st. But what is this team going to do? What are they going to do with these free agents? What are they going to do with the players who are still under team control but now have one less year remaining of that? There is a conversation surrounding this team that they make playoff pushes in 3-year spans. Well, 18, 19, and 20, I hate to say it, was a 3-year span. 21, they're out. Is 22 a push that you can make and not make it in a backdoor route? Like, can you go right through the front door with a rebuilt or a retooled 2021 team or a rebuilt team? I don't know. But how much movement are we going to see this offseason for the A's? I think that was number one here. I might have stole my own thunder. What comes next? Will they retool? Will they re-overhaul? And how does the CBA across baseball affect that? If that's the primary source of focus for everybody, and we're not talking about signing players because contracts can't be taken care of, then maybe all this stuff gets pushed back. Will next season start properly on time? Nobody's really, we're focused now on the baseball playoffs. Other people have transitioned into basketball and hockey and football seasons underway. But let's not forget that next year starting on time, at this point, is not a certainty. We do not know for sure that these two sides are even close together. And last, but definitely not least, something I'll make a separate video about in the near future, stadium progress at Howard Terminal. The A's in the city of Oakland still working at it. In the meantime, though, Alameda County reportedly has just come out and said that in late October, they are going to vote on their involvement with an IFD, an infrastructure financing district at Howard Terminal. They need to be part of this for the A's in the city to do what is hoped. So to now have the county joining in is a big deal. And the Board of Supervisors taking this up, I think it's the 27th of October. It's kind of like the next July 20th. We talked about that date for a long time. Obviously, it didn't work out as expected. It didn't work out as planned. It wasn't the ultimate worst case scenario of no to everything. It wasn't something that the A's and city still agree on. But stadium progress at Howard Terminal this offseason remains to be what I think is one of the absolute biggest topics for the Oakland A's. I mean, you think about in 20 years from right now, in 2041, are we going to remember what the A's did this offseason for their team? Or are we going to remember that this is the offseason that truly brought Howard Terminal Ballpark so that they could stay for this generation and many more? Kind of gives you important perspective there. So all of those things, these are my top three things that I'm focusing on right here for this A's offseason. And that does it. The 2021 season recap. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I was going to take some questions, but quite honestly, I ran this thing 42 minutes. And I don't even know, I forgot to actually check the live stream, make sure people are watching this old thing. Oh, yeah. We're good. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for watching this. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate that. And I will talk to you somewhere down the line. All right. Take care.